Welcome everyone to this information session on animal research and education ethics. My name is Sean Lacey. I'm the Research Integrity and Compliance Officer for the university. And I'll break this session into two parts. So the first will be this recorded session of where it's going to, I suppose, talk through the process of animal research and education ethics that we have in the university. Going to share some resources that we have up on the webpage, and that'll be the end to this first part. And then there's going to be a Q&A session then afterwards. So maybe just to kind of give a small bit of an overview, and I know that there was two information sessions towards the middle of June, one with a kind of a research focus and one with an education focus. So I'm going to be using some of those slides again here, but there's a few additional new slides, and there's obviously the webpage then that I'd like to show you also. So just to touch on animal research and education ethics that we have in the university. So it's essentially the case now, and this has been implemented since the 1st of September this academic year, that all engagement with animals for research and education purposes needs to have ethical oversight. So all engagement for research and education purposes needs to have ethical oversight. And this ethical oversight will be prior to the commencement of the study. Now, the study is a broad term. You can see I've underlined it there. The idea of a study would be that it could be a research study, but equally the definition that we use for study in our policies and procedures is around maybe a module or a program of study as well. Okay. There are, I suppose, many examples to what we would, I suppose, fall under this bracket of animal research and educational practice. And these are called out in our policies as well. This will be in relation to medical research that we'd have, maybe if you're doing drug testing with animals, behavioral studies of animals, genetic research, demonstration of husbandry techniques. Obviously, I'm just paraphrasing a couple of bullet points here that we have, or the disruption or interference of animals from their natural environment habitat. So I'm always cautious when putting together a list that it's not to be seeing, oh, look, I'm not any of those, so I should be fine. So that's indicative. It includes, but it's not limited to, and that's important to state, okay? We have documentation around animal ethics in the university. Again, these were approved in academic council in May, but for implementation since the 1st of September. And we tried to flag it with everyone as much as possible in June once we had got that approval from the academic council. The documentation that we have will be around animal research and education ethics policy. We have a terms of reference for the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee. We have a screening checklist around what application form to use, because we have two application forms. We have a minimal risk application form and a full ethical review application form. And all those, they're the documents that have been formally approved by the Academic Council. And all those documents are actually up on our Animal Research and Education Ethics webpage, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes as well. And to let you know then that there's one more document that will be ongoing this academic year, and hopefully this time next academic year it will be in place. And that's around having a protocol, a document around when engaging with animals, whether it's for research and educational purposes. So that's one where we're going to be currently this academic year, and I'll touch on this again in a few minutes. We're going to be engaging with various academic units around their use of animals for education practices, and we're going to be having a protocol in place for that will have ethical oversight and would be seen as an approved protocol that can be used going forward. So that's kind of a piece of work that's happening on an ongoing basis this academic year. And like I mentioned there, we have an Animal Research and Education Ethics webpage, and I'll show that in a couple of minutes. And all these documents are on that webpage as well. So when it comes, I felt it was important to maybe touch on a couple of the points from the policy. I mean, there's the policy, there's a good few pages to it. That's not said in a negative way, but just maybe some to draw your attention to a couple parts. So when engaging with animal research or education, it's important that there's training by the lead in that. Okay, so research and education, researchers and educators are required to participate in specific training. We have avenues for that training, and I'll show you links to that now as well. Okay. The Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee, so the AREC, will review all engagement with animals. So they're the first point of contact. When you're engaging with animals, the first point of contact will be the AREC. And then hopefully there will be approval for the engagement that you plan on doing, whether it's for research and education purposes. And then the ARIC will inform the animal welfare body, and if a slide about the animal welfare body as well. The two bodies, as in the ARIC and the animal welfare body, the AWB is the abbreviation I use there, work hand in hand with each other as well. When it comes to submitting applications to the ARIC, it is the PI, the lead for the study, would actually be submitting the application. So I suppose this is in particular for students that may be getting involved with animal research, whether it's for maybe a dissertation, for kind of a final year project, or a master's or a PhD. It's the supervisor or the PI that would be submitting the application for on behalf of the actual student. Now, what happens pretty much practically is the student does complete the ethics application form, because there's obviously learning involved in that. But the supervisor or the PI is the one that actually submits that to the actual committee. And it's important that the application needs to be in good shape before it gets submitted, so that there's the appropriate study design or animal study design prior to submitting the ethics application form. So it's not a case of, look, I'll submit in any random, I'll submit an ethics application. Excuse me. I'll submit an ethics application form and I'll see what the committee comes back with. The appropriate thought and design has to be put into it. And if it's a case of that a lot of that is lacking, it will just be returned. Okay. It's natural that when we conduct studies that what we might have planned at the start may change throughout the study. That's completely normal, and we have a process for capturing that as well. But it is important that if your study does change, what subsequent to seeking to obtaining approval from the ARIC, that you would notify the ARIC of this as well, if you before the change actually takes place. There is an end of study report form as well. So when your study finishes, and when you finish, where again the study, whether it's being for research or education, there's a form to complete that you can notify. So the ARIC would have that closed off on their side as well. The policy that we have applies to when we're engaging with external researchers as well, or external collaborators. Okay, so we do have a policy that we are working under the umbrella of MTU. If we engage with external collaborators, it is important that how we conduct our research with animals, or our teaching with animals, aligns with the policy, even if there is those external collaborators as well. And it's when it comes to, I suppose, submitting an ethics application form, right? We could have some researchers here in the university that could be collaborating with external agencies, but they may not be the leads. As in, just say I'm collaborating with an external body, I may not be the lead. I may not be, it may simply be a partner on that. Then the ethical approval should come from the host institution. It should come from the lead institution in that case. But if I am the lead to a research study that involves animals, then it's very important, and it's called out in our policy, that I'm the one that gets the ethical approval. The ethical approval comes from MTU. Okay. And if you end up as a researcher, we'll say, getting ethical approval from another university or another RPO, you would notify the ARIC of this as well. Okay, so you might not be the lead, which is absolutely fine, but you know, but you part of a study that has received ethical approval from another host institution, you would notify the ARIC of that as well. Okay. And ultimately, then, if we're looking at, I suppose, ethical oversight from other universities that we may be involved in, we have, as a university, the right to overrule that as well. Okay. And I'm happy to take any questions on it that we have on this as well. Okay, so please don't hesitate to pop them into the chat. Just, it's important to put up a couple of points about the animal welfare body. Like this discussion, this session here is focused on the animal ethics side, so for research and education. But there is an animal welfare body, which is a statutory body that we'd have in the university. And I suppose essentially what happens is, if you're engaging with animals, research or education purposes, you go to the ARIC first. Then hopefully, all going well, that you'd get approval from the ARIC. Now, there might be another step involved afterwards, but after that, in terms of HIPRA, I'll talk about HIPRA now in a couple of minutes. But essentially, the ARIC would give you the approval to commence it. Then the animal welfare body is who would oversee it and enforce the protection of the animals. Okay, so the ARIC is at the start to a certain extent. Now, the ARIC and the animal welfare body will be communicating with each other, but the animal welfare body will be overseeing it and enforcing any kind of, I suppose, parts of the study that you said that you were going to be implementing. Okay. When it comes to the review procedure, to how we're going to be looking at how we are going to be doing the work in the university. So you'd engage with the ARIC in terms of, look, you planning conducting research or education with animals. It is determined, look, is it research or is it for education? If it's for research, then there's a screening checklist. I'll signpost to this now in a couple of minutes. In that screening checklist, it's determined, look, is it minimal risk or is it full ethical review or is it minimal risk? Okay, so full ethical review is more often not something that would require licensing. So if you get approval from the ARIC in terms of your study that has required full ethical review, that's not the end of it. If it involves licensing, there needs to be approval then or sign off from HIPRA as well. And I'll have a slide on that shortly. If the study is minimal risk, and I'll have a couple of a slide on what constitutes minimal risk, then obviously you can proceed from there. If your study is going to be for educational purposes, well, then it's a case of, well, what is the educational activity? Ideally, if the educational activity is something in a module or a program or a dissertation, that it will be following an approved protocol. But that's going to be an ongoing piece of work this academic year. So while that's ongoing at the moment, is if a student has a dissertation that's going to be, so a final year project that's going to be involving animals, then that would be under the minimal risk approach, and that will be feeding through the ARIC that way. Or if it's going to be a program or module, then we'll be looking at the approved protocol. Okay, now that approved protocol is a piece of work again that is going to be ongoing this academic year. For minimal risk applications, so it's because I've mentioned minimal risk a couple of times, so what is minimal risk? So minimal risk is essentially where you don't require the HIPRA licensing. Okay, and there's a couple of examples here then to practices that would fall under the bracket of minimal risk. So this is where you'd have non-experimental agricultural practices, where you'd be doing, I'll just read out a couple of them, practices undertaken for the purposes of recognized animal husbandry, or the last bullet point there, practices not likely to cause pain, suffering, distress, or lasting harm, and so on like that. So there's obviously a bit more detail there, and obviously our policies and our screening checklist provides more information on this also. Okay. The flip side of minimal risk then will be something that the phrasing would be an animal procedure is what you'd have. And this will be something that is definitely required full ethical review and would require licensing from HIPRA as well. And essentially the gauge that we'd use, and not we, just NTU, this is done nationally and internationally, into look what would constitute a procedure is the pain to the animal. Would it be as severe, if not more, like than an injection to that actual animal? So that's kind of the threshold that is used for such a situation. Obviously, there's a bit more text here on the slide that can be used as a point of reference as well. But if we're engaging with animals for research or educational purposes, and that engagement is as severe, if not more, than as an injecting the animal, then that would be classified as a procedure, and you'd go through all processes, but then would have to go through the next step then of HIPAA processing, licensing as well. And the animal welfare body would be involved in that latter step also. Just to speak, I suppose, around a bit of guidance around, well, look, how do we distinguish between minimal risk and full ethical review? I gave a couple of examples on the previous slide, but we do have a screening checklist to kind of help with this as well. And it is a guideline document. It's not necessarily, hopefully it will be helpful. There may still be questions, and if there are questions, then we have an email address that you can reach out to, and that email address is actually mentioned on the screening checklist document as well. So if it's yes to any of these points here, then it's to any of them, then a full ethical review animal research and education ethics application form is required. If it's no to all of them, then it's more likely would be a minimal risk that's required. If you're unsure, then you reach out to us. You'd email the AREC at areec@mtu.ie. Sinead will just actually maybe pop that email address into the chat there. And if you're unsure, look which side to go before committing too far into completing an ethics application form, just email and we'll give some guidance on it. So obviously I've mentioned that bit already. So just to maybe draw attention to a couple, and these are just ones just to kind of to call it out for the sake of it. So changes to the diet, which will cause pain, hunger, or discomfort. If it's a yes to that, then that will be seen as something that will be for full ethical review. If you're looking at removing an animal from its mother or kin in early life, then that will be seen as something that would require full ethical review. I only picked them to kind of read out to and to draw your attention to them in the presentation, but obviously all 15 of them are very important. Then there's the case of that if you may have ethical approval somewhere else, so this is where maybe you're not the lead of a study, somebody else is the lead, they've got ethical approval from their institution, and you're notifying us, then that would be seen as kind of something that would be minimal risk. Or if you're following an approved protocol, then that would be seen as something that would be minimal risk as well. Okay. When it comes to the actual application form, it's because you there will be application forms submitted. So part of the, I suppose, the material that you require as part of the application process would be a data protection impact assessment. So we have a screening checklist, a guide. Do you require a full data protection impact assessment? If you do, then you go to our data protection officer for more information. Or if you don't, you'd submit your screening checklist with all your no's that you don't, and then that's part of the application as well. It's required that you'd have ethics training, animal ethics training as well. So EpiGene was one of our main platforms for that. I suppose the most easily accessible platform that we have, but there are other cases that some researchers or educators might have participated in ethics training in the past. That wouldn't be EpiGene, would be another platform, and they will be recognized, and that's done on a case-by-case basis as well. When you're engaging with an animal owner, that you may need to go onto their land to actually, I suppose, engage with the animal or to do whatever required, whether it's for education or research purposes, then it would be expected that there will be an information sheet, so kind of sharing with the animal owner to look what's the purpose of everything that's going on, and there will be a consent form that the animal owner would obviously sign. Then that's obviously important that you would include that in your application as well. And if you find that you're doing a study that involves engagement with animals, but also involves maybe, engaging with humans, maybe you plan on, when you're linking in with the animal owner, asking them to complete a detailed survey or something like that, a survey that's beyond just kind of consent to engage with the animal, but maybe something about their own perceptions or thoughts, then that would be delving into human research. And that in that case, then you'd have to go down both avenues of both the ARIC, which would look at the animal side, and the HREC, which would look at the human side. So, okay. And just the last thing then on this one here is just wanted to kind of give I suppose, an outline of the review process, because it's important that everyone is aware of how applications will actually be reviewed through this academic year. We've called these out as draft procedures because this is the first year that the ARIC is in existence. The membership, there's no doubt, are very experienced membership within the ARIC. But it is our first year actually working together to be reviewing applications. We do have a procedure that we will be following, but it's seen as a draft procedure as we kind of road test it essentially and gather feedback from reviewers, as in ARIC members, and also applicants to it, to actually, is it actually working? And then by the end of the academic year, we would look to formally be approving the procedure. And that might be based on tweaks to what you will see here. And this is a process that we did with the HREC as well back in 2023. And that seemed to work quite well also. So the way that the process actually works when somebody submits an application, so the animal research and education ethics application is submitted to the ARIC. Okay, the ARIC application is screened by the administrator. Based on the screening, is the application ready for review? If it's not ready for review, it's sent back to the applicant and they have to address whatever the feedback that they're getting from the administrator. So that's a screening process. That's not an ethical review. That's a screening process to make sure, look, that you have the form fully completed, that there's no obvious gaps. Because if there's any obvious gaps when they go to the ARIC, it just won't get reviewed and it will get sent back. So the administrator will kind of help expedite the process essentially by making sure that there's nothing really obvious missing. But it's not an ethical review. The ethical review is obviously done by the ARIC and their members. So then just say if an applicant doesn't have the form fully complete, it's sent back, then they fix up whatever's been highlighted to them or addressed, then they come back to the ARIC, and then it should hopefully progress. So then when it progresses, what type of application has been submitted? If it's a minimal risk, that's obviously seen as our kind of our shorter form that we'd have. Then how that is reviewed is it's assigned we have a chairperson, Dr. Garode Sayers is the chairperson to the Animal Research and Education Ethics Committee, and we have 10 members as well. If for minimal risk applications, it is reviewed by a chairperson and 2 members. Okay, and it's done. That review is done remotely, so there's no deadlines for those applications to be submitted. When they're submitted, as long as they pass the screening process, they're going to be reviewed by the chairperson and the 2 ARIC members, and then there will be feedback, and that's all done kind of online. So there's no meetings to discuss those things. and there's no monthly meetings for the minimal risk. That's the intention at the moment. If the application that is submitted is a full ethical review application or maybe an approved protocol application, well, then that's going to be reviewed at the monthly meeting. And how it's reviewed at the monthly meeting is there's the chairperson reviews along with 2 to 3 ARIC members, but all members have an opportunity to give an opinion on the actual application, whether it's a full ethical review or approved protocol. And they will be done at the monthly meetings, and I'll share a screen there in a few minutes around with the deadlines for these application dates as well. So then for either path, whether it's a minimal risk, full ethical review or approved protocol, the decision from the review as ratified by the ARIC, there is going to be a decision as ratified by the chairperson. The decision will be either approved, so there's going to be 1 or 4 outputs here. So it's either going to be approved, so then there will be a letter of approval is issued with an approval number, and that's obviously very important, that approval number part. It's provisionally approved, which means there's going to be some requirements or recommendations. So essentially the application is in good shape. It's nearly addressing everything, but there's some, I suppose, minor requirements or minor recommendations that need addressing before it can be formally approved. So what you do in that case, if you're provisionally approved, you get back that outcome, you'd address the points that we need addressing. We have a form to kind of capture that as well, and I'll show you the link to that in a couple of minutes. And then it gets sent back to the ARIC. But when it gets sent back, it just goes straight to the chairperson. It's a chairperson's action because it's provisionally approved. It doesn't have to go back to the reviewers or the full committee. Okay. If it's a resubmit, then that obviously means there's more than minor requirements or minor recommendations. There's a significant amount. We could use the word major there. And essentially you have to resubmit the application, which means it goes back to whatever that process is. If it's a minimal risk, it goes back to the applicant. Sorry, it goes back to the chairperson and the 2 members. Or if it's a full ethical review, it goes back to the next monthly meeting. Okay. Or else the final one then is where it will be rejected. And that's where the animal research and education ethics issues cannot be managed effectively, or the ARIC does not have the authority to approve that particular type of activity. Now, this is obviously a flowchart. It's a kind of seen as an infographic. It can't capture all facets to the procedure, but it hopefully gives a flavor to actually the way the work will be conducted. The procedure document itself is actually a 20-page document. So as you can appreciate, summarizing it into one flowchart is a challenge in itself. But if you want more information, by all means, you can reach out to us. I know there's the email addresses in the chat, but also it's here down on the bottom left of the screen as well. And here on this slide, there's the email address. And I'm just going to show you the Animal Research and Education Ethics webpage, ethics webpage that we have as well, which just links to all those documents that I've mentioned, and it gives a lot more additional information as well. So this is just the last part here. So the link to the webpage is obviously on a couple of slides, and Sinead has popped it into the chat there as well. I'll just zoom in another fraction just to make sure everyone can see it okay. That should be okay. All right, so we have scroll down here. So at the start, and I obviously won't read out everything here that you see, but we're linking to the policy, we're linking to the 2 application forms, the minimal risk, full ethical review. We're showing where these are. So this is obviously the Animal Research and Education Ethics webpage, but all these documents, like all our research and innovation documents and all our policy and procedure documents that we have in the university, they're on the mtu.ie/policies webpage. Here's the email address. Here's the link to the checklist. I'm happy to open up any of these documents if anyone wants to see them or talk through them or anything like that, but I'll just kind of give the overview at the moment. So we have the checklist document, a few points around what are examples of research and educational purposes. This text here, and a lot of the text, we try to take directly from the policy or whatever documents have been approved. So we're not looking at introducing new text here. We want it to be very much aligned to our policies that we have in place. Then the next part here, it just kind of shows, look, we have our 2 application forms. The minimal risk is done as a monthly, it has no monthly deadline, it is done on a rolling basis. The full ethical review, then there's monthly meetings for that. And here are the deadline dates for if you want your application to be reviewed at the monthly meeting. Now, just because you have an application submitted by a particular date, it doesn't necessarily mean it will be reviewed by at the next meeting. Like ideally it will, the majority are, but that's only if it's in good shape as well. Like, I mean, if it's lacking a significant amount in terms of the application form, there's a lot of gaps, it hasn't been fully completed, the screening process requires a lot of changes, and there's not enough turnaround time to actually get those changes, you might have to wait till the next meeting. Okay, so it's important that if you are submitting it, that you submit your application in good shape. Please. And as a guideline, we're working with 5 weeks. 5 weeks from when you submit your application. So if it's a minimal risk, when you submit it, and if it passes screening. So you'll get when your application passes screening, you'll get an application identifier. So it's not your approval number, it's just an identifier that you can use in future correspondence. And it's a way of us tracking all our email correspondence and stuff. And so when you get that identifier, if it's minimal risk, typically we would expect that you would have an initial outcome within 5 weeks. Okay, now, and it should be a bit less, but I mean, we're allowing that 5 weeks as we're in this first year of our work. And that outcome could either be approval, provisionally approved, resubmit, or reject. And you should receive that within 5 weeks. When you submit an application, if it's for full ethical review, then obviously you have these deadline dates that you have see here on the screen. And typically you should receive your initial outcome letter 5 weeks after that deadline date as well, as long as you get acknowledgement that it's progressing to the committee as well. If I scroll down a small bit more, just to let you know a few supporting resources that we have here under these various accordions. So the first one is just introduction, sorry, not introduction, but instructions around when you're preparing your animal research and education ethics application form. The next one here is just around, I suppose, the ARIC, and it's important that there's absolute transparency on how everything is actually being worked. So we have a terms of reference for the ARIC. The terms of reference is very much guided by HIPAA's guidelines on establishing ethics committees. And in here, you can see we have our membership. So we have our chairperson, Dr. Gerard Sayers. I won't call out all the members, but we have some ex officio members, and then we have members that are assigned based on their role. So we have a designated vet. We have a member that has experience as a veterinarian, who is actually Garode. We have a lay person, a person with experience in statistical analysis. The statistical analysis is required because it's important when you're engaged with animals that it's not, oh, let's just use as many animals as we can get. There has to be a rationale for the number of animals that you're going to be using. There has to be a statistical rationale for that. We have a member drawn from the research community. We have a member co-opted as well from our research data management library. Some additional resources that we have here, and these are things I would have mentioned before. I won't open them, just to kind of try to keep this as smooth as possible, but I'm happy to take any questions we have. But the first one here is if you get approval from an ethics application form, sorry, if you get approval from if you get approval from an application and maybe in a couple of months' time you find, look, that there needs to be a change. So we have an amendment to capture that. So amendment to previously approved animal research and education ethics application form. It's a mouthful, but we have a form for that. When your study is complete, we have a form that you submit to let the ARIC know that your actual study is finished. When you get an outcome from the ARIC that requires a response, so you might need to respond to requirements or recommendations made by the ARIC, we have a form to capture that as well. I've also mentioned about the data protection impact assessment, that there's a screening checklist that we'd have. And then if you tick yes to any of those, that you go to the data protection officer. So here's our screening checklist. And we also had an information session on earlier in this not earlier in the calendar year in February from our data protection officer, Carmel Hayes. And it gives, we have the video here on the slides, and it gives some very useful information on the various types of classification when you're screening doing a data protection impact assessment screening. And then the last accordion that we have here is just around the avenues that you could go for animal research and education ethics training. So there needs to be some certification when you submit your ethics application form. The Epigeum is probably one of the more accessible ones for those that may not have any training in place already prior to submitting an application. But equally then we'd have a lot of experienced researchers and academics that have engaged with animals for years and may have already done the training, and that can be recognized. That would be recognized, but that's done on a case-by-case basis as opposed to having a list of all those recognized trainings. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it for what I was hoping to cover in this part of the seminar. So I think thanks very much for your attention for that.